Oh man, I can't
So,
even believe that I didn't even think to tell you this, but my property in Philadelphia, because it's a row house,
hmm
property two doors down caught on fire, right? They're all attached, these houses.
okay.
Um, I had to switch insurance companies for this exact reason. My insurance went up times 10.
Wait, whoa, 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 whoa. Yes, yes. Welcome back to the Crucial Convo podcast. I got my good friend Don Masenya back in the building. How are you today, miss?
Hey, Osu, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great as always. How you been?
Good, just busy. We're starting off the 2025 season, so it's going to be very interesting.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. 2024 went by really quickly, I would say. I
It
feel like
did.
the last half, right?
Yeah, it was a tough year.
It was yeah, interesting and a tough year.
Yeah.
A year of revelations, a year of all kind of
Yeah.
craziness in the world. So
Yeah.
I think Cat Williams called it a year of
Listen, he
exposure.
better not do no interviews in the first quarter of the year. He better just sit tight.
This guy's looking like the prophet of all time, man. So you should have been talking to him about real estate. You know what I'm
Listen,
saying?
we
Because
could have gotten some good predictions out of him, I'm sure.
he knows something.
Yeah, for
You
sure.
know. So no, it's all good though. So yes, we're gonna talk about real estate today. You are all things on the ground, all over the place when it comes to, especially in
Oh,
NJ and PA.
an understatement.
So, so what have you been seeing? I know, obviously, before we even get into the nook and crannies of the goods and bads of real estate, I mean, what have you been seeing personally as far as New Jersey? And
Yeah.
I know you have your clause in PA as well, so I want to get your insight. What's going on? How's it going? How have you seen things in 2024?
So, the nice thing about 2024, it was my first opportunity to see just how different the two states culturally as far as real estate is concerned. So, New Jersey is a very aggressive real estate market. We're used to doing so many creative things in order to get buyers into properties just because of the limited inventory. And
Yeah.
what's nice about working in Pennsylvania is I'm starting to understand why a lot of agents that are not accustomed to doing real estate in New Jersey, why they have, certain nuanced differences. And Pennsylvania is a really nice, almost, it's a good barometer for, I think, for what the market generally is like. New York, New Jersey, I think is insulated from a lot of national stuff that you could say about the market.
Right.
Some of these other states, even though they're very strong markets, are not. So when people say things like, oh, prices are going to go down in New Jersey, that's just not going to happen. In Pennsylvania, I actually did see a downtick in values, more of
Okay.
a correction in values. So, uh, as far as that just being the biggest call out in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia area, that's my biggest call out. And it's still a very strong market. So it's not that it's a weak market. It's just that the adjustment actually happened in
Okay.
Pennsylvania, not a drastic one. And it did not happen in New Jersey. So I think that's the biggest call out for me. And also just culturally, they're just very, very different states. Pennsylvania tends to be, because there's no attorneys involved there's no attorney review process in Pennsylvania. A lot of the onus is on the realtor to protect and determine certain things for the buyers, for example.
Okay.
And the reason that's so interesting in 2024 was because of all the new laws that were rolled out in August. So
Right.
there was even more of in Jersey, we kind of have an attorney as a firewall, making certain that the buyers fully, fully, fully understand everything. Whereas in Pennsylvania, the weight of that, goes on the agent. So with all the new laws that came out, that became very, very interesting. Overall,
Okay.
I did not see what a lot of people, not yet anyways, but a lot of people might have predicted as buyers now paying a whole lot more as far as the commissions than sellers do. I'm still seeing sellers paying the commissions.
Got it.
I am also seeing sellers squeezing commissions on the buy side. I've gotten a couple of deals where my buyer was just not interested in taking everything on to be competitive in addition to paying the buyer's commission.
Hmm.
So my buyers basically have walked away from a couple of deals where the seller was not traditionally paying what they have been paying. So buyers
Got it.
do not seem very interested in footing the bill with everything else that they have to come to the table with when buying a house. It's extremely expensive.
Yeah.
Those are just a couple of the call outs that I've experienced in 2024.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's really interesting. So let me ask you about kind of the latter of what you said. So with the buyers, so those who aren't aware, National Association of Realtors lost a lawsuit, which essentially made it where the buyer is responsible technically to pay their agent the commission, where traditionally the seller would pay one commission to seller's agent, and that would be split amongst the seller's agent and buyer's agent. So effectively, or quote unquote, the seller was paying both agents. Now that the buyer has been responsible since August of 2024 to pay the buyer's agent. So people
Not
expected.
necessarily, Osu.
Go ahead.
Not necessarily. Well, all they've done is they've changed the rule of where we advertise that commission, right?
Oh no, I'm with you. I'm just
Right.
talking generically
Yeah, yeah.
for the average person, the generic understanding, right? So when that being said, people expected the buyer to be paying so much more money,
Yes.
and essentially nothing's really changed. Um, but what I thought was interesting about what you said is that buyers are walking away if there's a situation where the seller is saying, "Well, there's this new rule, so I'm going to reflect the commission I pay based on the idea that I'm just paying for my agent." And
Right.
when if I understand you correctly, when the buyer is looking at all the situations as far as the home cost, whatever came up in inspections, whatever they have to deal with, and then if the buyer actually has to pay extra money, the buyer is willing to walk away, if I understand you correctly.
Well, yes, that's absolutely right. So I'll give you a perfect example. I put in an offer for a multifamily for one of my clients. They've been looking for a very long time. A bulk of the conversation was about the legit, like what offer, how are we going to make this easy for the seller? We're going to assume all of the tenants. It was a fully occupied with the exception of one unit. We're going to take on all the tenants. The tenants were underpaying rent to the tune of, I'm going to say 30 to 40%, right? So now my buyer's
Okay.
saying, fine, I'll take that on, right? My buyer was also willing, for example, in this example, to take on any violations. They were going to take on the certificate of occupancy and whatever it was, whatever someone would be required to take that on, right?
Hmm.
Um, so basically, those two things alone, in addition to a very strong price, and this was also conventional, that is
Okay.
a very strong offer from a buyer to then be told, you know what, the seller would like to only pay the agent 1% and the buyer do the rest. The buyer's already taken on
Right.
a lot of risk, right?
Right.
The buyer is essentially saying, I'm going to make this easy for you, right? You're going to
Yeah.
close on time. You don't have to worry about a CO. You don't have to worry about repairs. You don't have to worry about getting rid of your tenants. And now you want me to pay an extra 1% to my agent, who's going to be running around like a crazy person because a lot of that work is going to fall on me, right, to take
Right.
care of. That just doesn't make any sense. I think it's suppressed. I think it's suppressed a lot of investors. So
Okay.
I think that those types of scenarios we're going to see more and more often. I think certain properties are going to sit on the market for much, much longer with sellers that, really just don't understand or don't really value a buyer's agent in the first place, right? And they also just don't even value the mechanics of getting a buyer to acquiesce to all of the things that I just talked about.
Right. Right.
And so,
Which
we
aren't
ended up,
small things.
which are not small things. So we ended up walking away from the deal. The buyer said, look, I've already taken on all these things. I would rather go in a different direction. And all those things it was a lot, it was a lot to
Yeah.
even convince them that that was possible. And I had to promise my client that I would be with them every step of the way. I
Hmm.
don't think it rings very, very well to ask buyers to do that. However, in a situation where a property is absolutely perfect, I can see a buyer saying, you know what, I really want this property, so
Right.
I'll fit a sum of the bill. But
Yeah.
the arrangement has to make sense for the buyer, and I just don't think in a market right now, also where interest rates have gone back up to 7%, right?
Hmm.
So again, fewer buyers are going to be on the market. Buyers are both exhausted at looking in general, and they're also exhausted at the expense of it all. We've
Yeah.
essentially it's 30 to 40% more expensive now to buy a house. Well, as far as your monthly payments are going to be concerned when it comes to these interest rates. So now
Hmm.
you're telling that buyer, hey, listen, I also want you to add this additional bill. This is not a good move, I think, for buyers at all.
Yeah. Well, and that's exactly what we don't want to happen, and that's what everybody was worried about. That's a textbook scenario of what this new law of being, sellers saying, okay, I'm not going to pay the buyer's agent, quote unquote. And so in that scenario, do you think that sellers do you think they're coming off this whole, they're still living in the 2021, 2020
In addition to
world?
that,
Do
in
they still
addition to
feel
that,
like,
yes, yes. So in addition to that, I mean, think about what I just described to you. A buyer willing to take on all of this stuff, including city violations, right?
right,
The list of existing city violations was already exhaustive. So now we're in a transaction. The city has to come back inside. They're only going to add to that list. So
right,
now you're basically saying, hey, all of this stuff that you're going to have to deal with, which again, this all started from 2020 when the market was hot and buyers were falling all over each other. Buyers
right,
were bridging appraisal gaps. Buyers were doing
right,
all kinds of goofy stuff in order to get,
anything,
accepting properties
writing
with oil
letters?
tanks. Buyers were doing all kinds of stuff.
Yeah,
So now sellers are behaving as though we're in that same environment and we're not. Now, I will say some sellers, if they're smart, are happy with three, four, five offers. You only really just need one very, very, very good offer at the end of the day.
sure,
You don't need 20 offers. Only one person's is gonna win.
right.
Saying, oh, I got 20 offers on this deal
20 may
means
make you feel good.
it might sound good, but it's
Right,
completely unnecessary. 4 to 5 offers is more than enough. And that's still
right,
I'm still describing an aggressive market if you're getting 4 to 5 offers on your property. But if you're not getting 4 to 5 offers on your property because you think you're in 2020 and you think you can have a buyer accept all kinds of shenanigans in addition to this expense, that is just not going to make sense. Unless you have a property that is just to die for and you are presenting an incredible deal. Now, if they were presenting an incredible deal on the sales price, I can make that argument to the buyer.
sure, sure.
But that's not that residual culture of 2020. They still have it stuck in their minds, and that's just not the reality.
They're still in that mindset.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think I was wondering if that was still an issue because yeah, if a seller hasn't sold their home but they lived through that period of time,
yeah.
obviously they're obviously thinking like, okay, yeah, in a way there still is low inventory, right? So that's still a
In a way,
reality.
it's not in a
You know
way.
what I'm
In
saying?
reality, yeah,
It is, right? But at the same time, the cost to buy a home, like you said, they don't realize there's not as many buyers. So that has changed too. So it's in that time in 2020, 2021, even parts of 2022, there were limited inventory, but there were tons of buyers. So
yeah.
it's all about, supply and demand, obviously. But it seems that some sellers are still thinking that way. Now, in that scenario, was the buyer did the buyer feel like, do you think buyers feel in that scenario, do they feel guilty in a way as far as not wanting to, compensate the buyer and make up that difference to the buyer's agent? Or is it a situation they're like, yo, I want to make sure you're compensated, so we're going to walk away from this?
No,
Like, how do they look at it?
more of the latter, right? So they knew what it was going to entail, and they knew what I would be signing up for, should they have taken the deal. And
Mm,
it's not like these folks did not have the money, but at some point we're being pigs here, right? And I think that's always the case with real estate. Everyone thinks that they're an expert in real estate. People who don't practice real estate always have an opinion. I don't know any other job where someone always has a freaking opinion. Well, actually, you know what? Football is one of those jobs where, somebody always has an opinion that they're very strong about, like what the team should look like. I'm not a football fan, so I'm
yeah,
probably going to, misquote a lot of things, but people feel as though they can chime in on what we do. People really, really severely undervalue what we do. They forget very quickly how much of us they ask. And so I think that this particular client, and I try to only work with clients that have a full understanding of the value of what I do. And I think that
Right.
that's what is actually done. I'm hearing a lot of buyers, for example, talking about guilt that tell me straight up, and I always have to do some digging into this. All these agents are not calling me back. So now I got to figure out, why are these agents not calling you back? You know, if you're pre-approved for a very, very substantial amount, that should be worthwhile to the agent. But if I get into a conversation with a buyer that does not feel as though, if it comes to that, they would compensate me, I have to make a decision as to whether or not this would be worthwhile for me. Most of the time it is not, because most buyers, not most buyers, but the buyers that I personally like to work with and the buyers that I target understand how difficult it is to get into a house, and do understand the value of an agent.
Hmm.
But even those folks, you know, I sometimes have to kind of remind them, hey, listen, you know, there are so many things that we have to do in order to just get you in a deal. And we can't even guarantee that it's going to close. So I
Right.
do think that the one, and I think you and I have spoken about this, one of the valuable things about what they've done is that they're now forcing buying agents to have these conversations with buyers. And now buyers agents are qualifying buyers. They're
Right.
like, we understand how much time, work, and energy. I mean, we could spend 6 months with you, working with you, the deal falls apart and not get paid at all, and
Yeah.
then we have to do it all over again. Am I going to invest my time as a contractor into someone that feels as though I should do that for free over and over again? No, I'm not. And I
Yeah.
think that that's what a lot of buyers are starting to see. I feel as though real estate was hard enough for a buyer to find a good agent. I think it's even harder now if you're going to be a pig about it.
Hmm.
If you're not willing to
Hmm.
compensate someone that's uh, doing all that is entailed in this process, you're most likely not going to find a quality agent. I don't think, right? I might
Yeah.
be wrong.
No, I totally agree. I think that's totally true because at the end of the day, though, that's a mathematical certainty that every deal doesn't go through,
Right.
and and especially if the let's say you have a buyer that can't make a decision. You know what I'm saying? And even being in a market where there's limited opportunity, you still have people who want to buy a home that cannot pull the trigger, don't know what they want to do. They may change their mind. Oh, I want to,
Take a break
I
this
want to.
year.
Yeah, yeah, so
Yeah.
you're never really shielded from that when you're representing a buyer as an agent. You know what I'm saying? As a seller's agent, someone wants to sell their home, more than likely they're going to sell it eventually in this market, unless they're doing something ridiculously stupid as
Mhm.
far as marketing the home or
Yeah.
the price, obviously, which is part of marketing. But for a buyer's agent, you definitely have a roll of the dice depending on the personality. So, like you said, you do have to. They're vetting you, you're vetting them. You know what I'm saying? Because no one wants to waste time. So now I wanted to ask you about Philly. So with PA versus New Jersey. So there still is an assumption that everybody wants the American dream, quote unquote, the single family home or a
Yeah.
home. So the single family home, I want to talk about that a little bit. In PA, right? Generally, do you see, is it still mainly multi, or you're seeing more single family home, or a little bit of both as far as what buyers are seeking, especially particularly people who are moving from a more expensive market such as a New York or a New Jersey
Yeah.
to PA? What are they looking at? What's the trend from what you see?
I think for New Yorkers and North New Jersey buyers that are looking towards a Philadelphia market, Philadelphia is a beautiful town. You're not going to go without, right? So it's got great culture, food, all of that stuff. So you're going to live in a really great town. You move to Pennsylvania, your taxes are going to be drastically reduced. Your options are going to be much wider because you're probably earning an income that's supposed to sustain you in North New Jersey as well as New York. So it's a great opportunity for folks that can either make the commute or work from home. I have a couple
Hmm.
clients where that is their scenario, where they're really considering it. They live in New York. They know they can't afford to buy anything in New York. I have actually one client, to the point that you're making, that was originally going to buy a condo in New York. That deal fell through. The attorney recommended me, and luckily she has family in Philadelphia. She went
Okay.
from wanting to buy a condo, single family, right, to a multifamily, right, for two or three family. which she can afford with the condo money that she was going to
Oh, of
spend in New
course.
York.
Yeah, of course.
So I think it depends on the market that you're investing in. If you're someone that wanted to buy a single family in New York, tried to do it, or North New Jersey, tried to do it, you might
Yeah.
actually be compelled to say, wait a minute, I can't afford to buy a multifamily in North New Jersey. I can't afford to buy a multifamily in New Jersey, but I wanted a single family because it was just more affordable, right? But
Hmm.
now that I have the opportunity to go somewhere where the taxes are less and the values are just not, through the roof, I might
Yeah.
actually go in the multifamily direction. Or some people that just go, you know what? No, I definitely want a multifamily. But I'm seeing, I would say a lot of my clients are looking for multis still,
Yeah.
still looking for multis, no matter where you're coming from.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, and that makes sense. I mean, in this part of the country, yeah, I think unless you're finding a single family that makes sense, and obviously in the price range, multis seem to be, something that makes a lot of sense, obviously in New Jersey. But I was wondering if that was the same in PA. So it's interesting to see that. Now in PA, generally the singles are the singles more abundant as far as the sales, or would you say the multis people are selling multis a little bit more, or kind of
No,
just
it's
depending
kind
on
of
what?
the same as far as the ratios. And this is just, from limited experience. I've only been in the market a couple of years.
Yeah.
So then and also the inventory is just different in a big city like Philadelphia. So you've got closer to the city, the inventory is just smaller. And I mean by the size of the properties. There's a lot of row houses in Philadelphia.
Hmm.
There's a lot of transportation, in the center of Philadelphia that kind of spreads out like a web throughout the city. So
Hmm.
in Philadelphia itself, single family residence, unless you're in neighborhoods, and by single family residence, I mean detached properties, right?
Yeah.
Those are in certain neighborhoods, right?
Right. Right.
But the row houses, that kind of single family property, those are in abundance.
Yeah.
And it works well as far as the infrastructure of the city because, they're small footprint and they get you and the bus is right there, right? So I can
Yeah.
walk to the bus and I'm in downtown Philadelphia. I'm in the heart of
Right.
the city. So it's a completely different landscape as far as the variety of real estate. We don't have
Yeah.
that many row houses, townhouses,
Yeah.
in North
Yeah.
New Jersey. We have them, but not as much as a town like Philadelphia. And I think a lot of major towns are also similar in that way.
Yeah. I think Baltimore is a lot like that
Yes.
too.
Yeah.
I got a friend that lives in Baltimore, and it's a lot of that. So you kind of touched on something I wanted to go into. So obviously, there's four main issues when it comes to buying a home, right? You have the general inflation, the cost of buying a home. You got the cost of you know insurance has been going up, right? You have taxes that are also going up all at the same time, and obviously borrowing costs with the interest rate. So I want to talk about property taxes.
Hmm.
So property taxes is something that I find very interesting because there's a whole, depending on where you're at in the country, there's kind of a revolt about property taxes, and
Hmm.
people hate. Everybody hates property taxes,
Yeah.
right? So it's always
Everybody is
like, don't.
paying for anything. So that's
Of
just, yeah.
course,
Yeah.
of course. So but property taxes are interesting because property taxes have gone up a lot. Obviously, New Jersey has high property taxes. I recently went down, visited my sisters in Texas. Both of them one lives in Austin now, and one lives in San Antonio.
Yeah.
And they're coming from Illinois, so they were telling me how the people, like, let's say in Austin, for instance. Austin's had ridiculous growth, like
Yeah.
ridiculous, in the last 4 years,
Yeah.
right? Because everybody from California is moving over there, and
And Jersey.
Jersey,
Hmm.
and New York,
And New York.
and
Yeah.
so they were talking about how, the locals who have been there a long time are complaining about how property taxes are so high. And I'm like, well, how high are your property taxes per year? Everything's relative. So they're like, yeah, it can be as much as, 5,000, 6,000 a year. And I'm like, wow, wish I
I
could
wish.
find that.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So it's an interesting thing. So when it comes to property taxes, I want to play something because there's a whole thing about looking at whether property taxes are unconstitutional or
Oh
whether they
boy.
should be revised. So I
Oh
want to
boy.
I want to play something and then talk about, what do you think if there is an option to change property taxes? Because the argument is that, okay, people are saying, okay, I own my home, and obviously, when you buy a home, you have two fixed costs. You have The cost of buying the home and the interest rate, right? Those are fixed. Insurance is never going to be fixed, and property taxes are not going to be fixed. We'll talk about insurance in a little bit, but I want to just play something on property taxes. And
what percentage of property taxes go to schools? Have you ever wondered how your property taxes contribute to the education system? Let's break it down. In the United States, property taxes play a significant role in funding public schools. First, let's look at the overall picture. Property taxes are a major source of revenue for local governments, and a substantial portion of this revenue goes towards education. According to various studies, approximately 36% of total funding for K-12 education comes from property taxes. To be more specific, in the 2020-21 school year, property taxes contributed about $301 billion, which is around 36% of the total education funding. This funding is crucial as it supports a wide array of educational services, including teacher salaries, school infrastructure, and educational resources. The reliance on property taxes varies by state. For instance, in Connecticut, local property taxes account for roughly 58% of all education funding.
Oh, wow.
This can lead to significant disparities between wealthier and less affluent school districts, as wealthier areas can generate more revenue from property taxes, even at lower tax rates.
Right.
Summary: property taxes are a consistent and reliable source of funding for schools, but the exact percentage can vary by state and local policies. However, on a national average, about 36% of K-12 education funding comes from property taxes. This system, while stable, also highlights the need for reforms to address the inequities it can create between different school districts.
when it comes to property taxes, when you're dealing with buyers, is that something that you see a lot of buyers, even think about?
Yeah, it is because it goes to what their monthly payments are going to be, right? If you're buying a renovated house and mid-transaction they reassess the property taxes, you may not qualify for that same house anymore.
Right.
So it really depends on just how drastic it is. I mean, I've seen some of our markets go from you buy something. Irvington is one of the markets that I think property taxes need to be looked into.
Yeah.
You go from when you're running around looking for a house, the initial property taxes are $6,000. They do a renovation, now they're $15,000. I don't see how there is any way you're telling me that someone has made such a drastic improvement to a property that it would call for tripling property taxes.
Right.
I think property taxes should absolutely go up. But if the property that I'm looking at is across the street from a gas station, let's be real here, right? If it's in a neighborhood, let's just say that a buyer is willing to spend a huge amount of money on properties. They should not be to purchase a property. They shouldn't be penalized. And I don't think that certain towns, I don't think that they manage this. It's really a windfall if you think about it. I don't think that they're managing the fact that Essex County in particular, you're having a lot of buyers come in here properly. You cannot just triple taxes and think no one is going to pay attention. What am I getting back for it? Are you guys actually doing things in the school system where I'm going to get something back for it? Are there certain programs for children that I'm now going to be able to enjoy because I've made this investment by purchasing something in the town? In our towns, right? Predominantly Black and brown towns, that to me is vital. And that to me is very important. I don't have a problem paying a little bit more for property taxes if I know that what I'm getting back is legit. A buyer, however, they're most of the time buying for the first time. And all they're seeing is that big ticket number. And it's very difficult to try and get the type of information that would, illuminate what I just said. I'm not allowed to, as an agent, tell you that this is a great school district. I'm not allowed to give you those nuances. I'm not allowed to do that. You have to do that on your own, right? You have to do that due diligence on your own.
Sure.
So that kind of creates, I think, a redirection of where someone may invest. I have a lot of people that, for example, are not investing in one particular town. And part of it is some of what I've advised them to do. Like, hey, listen, your property taxes are going to double if you buy in this town. This is just what this town has been doing, right?
Right.
So be careful. It's my job because I'm a fiduciary responsibility to the buyer to let them know anything that I know, right? And if I see something consistently enough, I need to let a buyer know that. And so in a way, The market does respond to any expense you throw at a buyer.
Yeah,
Property taxes is one of those immovable expenses. In fact, it's one of those expenses that only goes up.
it
So
only goes up,
if
right?
you're
Yeah.
already at you have an astronomical bill in
Hmm.
Irvington and it's guaranteed to go up, would you want to
Yeah.
invest in Irvington? Probably not. What are you getting out of these towns, right? Are
Yeah.
these towns properly run? A buyer doesn't know that. Until you're living in the town, you really don't
You
know.
don't know. You
You
don't
really don't
know.
know. And
Yeah.
you're relying on anecdotal information from friends, family. They have their preconceived notions of what a particular town used to be like. They
Right.
have very limited understanding. As much as most people like to, really give people in real estate, really give people their opinion. The truth of the matter is, until you live in a town and until you actually start exercising all the things that are um, available to you, you're really not going to know.
You don't have a
So
clue. Yeah. That's so
property
true.
taxes are a tough thing, but to kind of, wrap up your question, yeah, buyers do because it makes a huge difference as to what they qualify for, and as they should.
Well, you know what? I should have rephrased it. They are aware of what the taxes currently are, but you actually, the way what you said is exactly the point. They're not aware a lot of times of the potential for reassessment,
Hmm.
right? Even if it's not a crazy astronomical reassessment, they're not even ready for a small reassessment that may
Right.
push their payment up $300. I've had people where their payment, from reassessment, it went up $300 of their total cost, and that's a lot in these times for some people. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? If they're already really tight. So that's an interesting thing. Now, what I wanted to also talk about was, and I don't know if you've had this conversation with other professionals. This isn't something that buyers and sellers think about.
Okay.
Assessors, county assessors.
Hmm.
So one of the things I've been seeing and what's causing this little property tax revolt around the country in certain pockets is that they're starting to find that there's pressure from state, maybe national, but state down to local assessors to keep these property values up in
Hmm.
assessment. So that's an interesting thing I've been seeing, and what it seems to be causing is causing the property taxes to keep being pushed up year over year over year in some places, and I think that I don't know if that's sustainable, but I'm wondering if that's something that, so for instance, if we were to change property taxes in any effective way, I've wondered constantly, like, what would replace that income, because property taxes are used for particular services in any municipality. So it's not like we could totally get rid of it. If we did, where would the money come from? So I think that's something that,
I think that's a case by case basis. I think it really depends on, no one ever shows up for the budget meetings. I
right,
don't even show up for the budget meetings. I think part of the reason folks don't show up for those meetings is because it tends to be very complicated. It is not, we are just not as engaged in those conversations. Nothing happens in your local town that you don't have a say in, that you can't show up for. If you're not
absolutely,
showing up for these things, all you're doing is basically complaining about it.
right,
And if you're not showing up in masses, if that's not culturally what you tend to do, they
hmm,
basically get to do whatever they want to do, and then you individually have to fight, and you individually have to say, "Hold on, wait a minute," right?
right,
So I guess to answer your point, I was not aware that there was a push to keep pushing property taxes up. I was always under the assumption is that it's a simple calculation, right? You just have your tax rate, and the assessor basically values your home based off of what they have on the tax record, how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, et cetera, et cetera. And that's that, right? A simple calculation. To me, that's an effective way to remove any idea that there's some funny business going on with the property tax values. And the only thing that you can do as a buyer is say, no, I do not have two bathrooms. I have one. No, my
right,
basement is not finished.
right,
No, I do not have a finished space in the attic. So my taxes in Philadelphia actually went up very recently. Every year they give you an opportunity, a small window. Well, it's not really a small window, but they give you a window to come back and ask the assessor, what comps did you use for my property, right?
right,
So the engagement has got to be there. The only thing that puts
absolutely,
fear in administrators' hearts is people that are educated on the issues,
Hmm.
and ready and willing to engage. And we know that
Yeah.
most people are not. So they end up doing whatever they want to do. So if we really want to
Yeah.
have a conversation about who's to blame, not to say that the taxpayer is to blame, but the taxpayer can affect, the outcome of what these taxes look like. But it's one of
Yeah.
those things where I do think it's almost like the people that are supposed to represent you, I don't know that they necessarily are when it comes to representing you on this issue,
Right.
because it's almost like, how do you police yourself? Like how does if I want you to run the town in an efficient way and I want you to use this funding well, shouldn't there be some watchdog that says you're doing too much, you're charging people so much? But really, there isn't any because the tax assessor works for, the city. And so, they're all in the same building.
Right. That's exactly my point. I mean, and I think that you're totally right. I mean, I think that the engagement from potential homeowners or especially homeowners and citizens in general have to be more. And I think with information that is changing. So I agree. I don't think it's all about just complaining because it's a very nuanced issue. But at the same time, I think it's something that going forward, it's a real concern for property owners going forward
Yeah,
because we are in times where there are people, there are a lot of people who actually lose their home because of property taxes.
right,
They may own the home, but they may not be able to maintain $1,200, or $1,000 a month in property taxes.
right.
Just for example, if you're living in a place that's 12 grand a year, I mean, depending on where you at, there's certain parts of Jersey where the taxes are that much, and
A lot of
there
parts of Jersey where the taxes are that much.
are more than that in a
Yeah,
lot of cases. So for instance, we had the issue in East Orange. We had the school district was, I believe it was 5 million. It might
yeah.
have either $5 or $8 million in deficit, and they had the whole town hall meeting. And a lot of times citizens start to realize things once things are bad. You know what I'm saying? So to your point, a lot of times if we're not tapped in, people don't start yelling and showing up until things are already bad, and cuts and changes and things that are going to affect your lives are going to happen. And to your point, a lot of times with tax dollars, people are not really aware where things are going. And you're right, there really is no checks and balances, because if you have someone who is an assessor, who's checking the assessor? I mean, the only person that checks the
It's
assessor
supposed to
is
be our council people.
and well, you have, I
Supposed
believe,
to
what
be.
I understand, they have a comp controller who's a state comp
Mm.
controller
Hmm.
who is above the assessors.
Right.
And so there was a particular case in Texas where they uncovered that the comp controller was actually pressuring the municipal assessors to go back or to hit a certain number, for certain communities because they need the tax dollars. And what's happening in certain cases is that so the tax dollars go to the school and the schools issue bonds.
Hmm.
So what they found is that a lot of the municipal bonds were trash. They found out when they started to look at some of these budgets is that the bonds that the school districts or the municipalities are issuing, they can't pay them. So when those bonds, they may be 5 year, 10 year, when those bonds mature, the municipalities don't have the money to pay it. So the bonds are going to default. So, all this stuff is important because I think that people have to understand where tax dollars are going, particularly property tax dollars. And like you said, it is a case by case basis. We can't say every town is not taxing or taxing incorrectly or spending their money wrong, but it's also important to kind of do your own assessment to understand what the hell's going on because
Yeah, but and that's the part of it that's frustrating. Your elected representatives are supposed to have some kind of and again, their salaries are tax dollars, right?
right.
They are the ones that are supposed to, on some level, decode this for folks. To require people, and this is why we fail at this so much, to require people to almost have an accounting degree to understand what a budget looks like, to understand why, all of
Right.
that stuff is very complicated. And if your councilman or councilwoman is not, if they don't feel as though that is something that they need to be part of that education, then it doesn't really matter. So unfortunately,
Hmm.
everything is local. Politics
Right.
is local politics is extremely important when it comes to,
Hmm.
taxes.
Yep.
And you really got to start paying attention now that you're spending, $13,000 on taxes. Pay attention to who you're electing. Pay
Right.
attention to what they're doing with it. Are you seeing improvements around you? If you're not seeing improvements around you, like some of these other towns, all you're basically doing is filling some deficit that they've probably kept hidden for a while.
Right.
You're kind of paying a back debt, in a way.
Absolutely.
So paying
Absolutely.
attention to who is driving the ship, I think, is very, very important. Not giving your vote away, I think, is very, very important. Forcing your elected officials to have real conversations on a consistent enough basis about these issues, that's what will expose them, right? That's
Yeah.
once you rip the covers off, what am I looking at now, right? So
Right.
unless people are having these conversations and getting involved in that way, and really kind of holding their council members, to account, they're going to keep doing this. So,
They're gonna keep doing it.
and,
Yeah.
and what we know about American life is very busy. Who wants to show
Absolutely.
up at these things and try to advocate for yourself when you have so many things going on with your children and your life and your work and, all of these things. So I almost feel as though this is one of those things where if you're buying into a town, you just have to kind of have a good understanding of what direction this town generally goes in when it comes to
Yeah.
taxes.
Right.
If you're not necessarily willing, but if you don't have the capacity to do the research, okay, is this town known for crazy increasing taxes, right?
Yeah.
And if it is,
Exa-
am I getting enough from this town to do that? Right.
Absolutely.
So that's really kind of the conversation people have to have with themselves as they're going through the buying process.
I totally agree. I mean, you're totally right because if you are going to buy into a town, and like I said, people are usually looking at, okay, what are the taxes now?
Hmm.
But the taxes in 2020 ain't the taxes in
Not at all.
2024, or 2025. So in some cases, and most places, I mean, there's some places the taxes have went up maybe 30% in the last couple of years. So it is something. And in addition to that, you mentioned this earlier as far as prices. So prices are cooling in some places. Prices are going to stay solid in other places. So New York, New Jersey, we know that it's just the way it's built. Depends on where you're at. Even Austin has cool. Austin got ridiculous. It was ridiculous as far as the prices that went up during the pandemic because everybody's rushing down there, and it's still in a growth phase. But
Yeah.
the properties, it's cooled down a little bit because demand is down a little bit, and that's natural. But it is important for people to kind of understand and not get so hyped up on a trend or a moment and emotionally doing certain things because there's a lot of people who were doing that during the pandemic. It's very emotional, and now they're like, I got buyer's remorse. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
or now I might be underwater. So it is something that I think people have to be, you know, not just
Conscious
patient,
of
but
that.
more
Hmm.
more aware, not depending on you to the realtor to tell them everything about everything.
Right.
You
Right.
know, so what do you think about this? Is a whole nother subject for a second. What do you think about the wildfires? You have any people in LA? Anybody you know in LA?
No, no, I don't have any folks in LA. I think it's it's one of those horrible, horrible tragedies. I never understand. Like, I know that there's on our disclosures, we have a new flood disclosure in New Jersey, for example, where the seller has to disclose whether or not the property is in a flood zone, et cetera, et cetera.
Hmm.
And that's a pretty easy thing to say whether they're required to have flood insurance or not. And
Yeah,
if they are in a flood zone, they have these maps. So when it comes to the potential for natural disaster, I think it's heartbreaking because you know,
yeah,
I don't know how it works, right? I don't have enough experience with these types of wildfires, but we know we hear about it every year of people
yeah,
losing their homes in California. And most of them are man-made fires. We're hearing now that it's potentially an arson that may
yeah,
have, lit one of the other fires. And
yeah.
I don't know how they get around that. I mean, the devastation was insane.
It's
Um,
crazy.
it's absolutely insane. And the fact that, there just isn't a capacity to put down this sizable fires, I think is really, really heartbreaking. So honestly, my point would just be, is there such a thing as a fire zone, right? Is that a thing,
Right.
And
I don't know because that's I was thinking the same thing because so what was kind of whack to me was that they're trying to blame the mayor because she was in Ghana at the time, and I'm like, dude, and they're like, even Elon Musk had said, tweet, um, they picked DEI over lives or something like that. And I'm like, dude, what is this little Puerto Rican lady going to do to stop
A
these
wildfire,
fires? Like,
spontaneous wildfire.
physically, her being there, what is that going to do? So I just think that, to your point, I was like wondering, like, one, is there something infrastructurally that could be put into place? I really don't understand.
I don't know.
Because at first, when I first heard it, I'm like, how are these fires burning in December? And I'm like, okay, somebody had to start it, because it's not like northern California where they have it's really hot and dry and a forest fire starts or whatever. But somebody started something. But I'm
Yeah.
wondering, infrastructurally, I don't know if there's something that could be like a fire zone, something that could be put into place to I don't know. I mean, some things are man-made. God put certain things into place sometimes that are bigger than us, but I think the only thing we can do is kind of learn from it and try to figure out from an infrastructure standpoint, how do we deal with it? Like in New Orleans, they
Yeah.
had the levees and things that they needed to, um for lack of a better word, to rebuild or make them stronger. So Katrina shouldn't have happened
Right.
because they've had smaller floods before. So I don't know going forward in LA if there's something infrastructurally that that could prepare for something like this. I don't know.
I think we're going to find out in the coming weeks to come. How do you prevent these types of things instead of just dealing with
Yeah.
the devastation? That it just seems to me such a, I guess because it's a much drier climate. It's not like. And again, this might be a great conversation to have with a firefighter. How does this happen? I know that obviously
Yeah.
when something burns, here in the Northeast, our houses are close enough together. But
Yeah.
many of
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
houses have firewalls. There are a lot of requirements as far as how you finish a home, as far as all the alarm systems, et
Yep.
cetera, that get that
Hmm.
emergency personnel to your home quickly enough. But I'm assuming they have the same mechanisms in California because they are very regulated in California. But I'm wondering if just the way that fires naturally happen out there are just much more aggressive because of how dry it is, how close the properties are together. I don't know. I really don't know,
Well,
but I think we're going to
you
know
you
for the next couple of months.
well, what's interesting when you say that too is so I'll play this little clip that Joe Rogan, um he had a conversation with a firefighter back in 2024.
Okay,
Excuse me,
great, great.
in the summer of 2024. So
Okay.
about 7 months ago, he had this conversation with a firefighter. I want to play this Joe Rogan video. I thought it was very interesting. It's been going around the internet about him talking to this firefighter.
I talked to a fireman once. He was telling me, he goes, dude, one day, he goes, it's just going to be the right wind and fire's going to start in the right place and it's going to burn through LA all the way to the ocean. And there's not a thing we can do about it. I go, really? He goes, yeah, we just get lucky. He goes, we get lucky with the wind. He goes, but if the wind hits the wrong way, it's just going to burn straight through LA and there's not going to be a thing we can do about it. Because these fires are so big, dude. When they're talking about like thousands of acres that are burning simultaneously with like 40-mile-an-hour winds. And the wind's just blowing embers through the air, and those embers are landing on roofs, and those houses are going up, and they're landing on bushes, and those bushes are going up, and everything's dry. And once it happens in a way where it's so spread out that there's nothing they can do. There's nothing they can do.
You just have to evacuate, right?
Nothing.
I think if you have to be evacuated 3 times, I think it's not a leap to make that assumption. And then also he has access, obviously, to a firefighter who told him this. You know what this reminds me of is, I don't know if you remember, I think it was Hurricane Sandy and how LBI was completely, covered. And the way
Hmm.
LBI is, it's kind of like a little, it's a finger that sits that sits right on the ocean line. And I remember hearing at the time people saying, do not build new homes in Long Beach Island. Do not do that. It's going to be underwater, right?
Mm.
It doesn't matter how much flood insurance you force people to have. It doesn't matter how high you force people to build their homes. People are very forgetful. And,
Yeah.
people tend to not really want to believe until it happens. So if I was
Yeah.
evacuated 3 times for a fire, a flood, or whatever the case may be, me personally, I'm going somewhere else because I
Yeah.
know that these eventualities, I know 30 years goes by like that and these things
Yeah.
become eventualities, right?
Yeah.
I didn't know that what the comment that Joe Reagan just made, I didn't know it was that severe as far as LA is concerned, right? as far as the capacity for the fire to take the whole town, right? But think about
Well,
New York
what the
City.
firefighters said that the firefighters said that the Santa Ana winds, the way they blow, he said he said that the firefighter said that we've been getting lucky. So it's just the fact that the winds have been not been blowing in a certain direction. But he said all we got to do is you catch the right fire and
Yeah,
you catch a fire with the right winds blowing the right way. He's like, it'll burn all of LA all the way to the ocean.
yeah.
That's what the firefighter. So you, to your point, yeah, if I heard that, I'd be kind of like, yo, this is something
But
that
how
could
often do you
happen.
hear
Yeah.
that? And think about the national panic that would be. So I think the government knows a couple things. A, there's nothing we can do about it until something happens.
Hmm.
Because what do you do about it? You can't go and with something like this, you can't go and again, I guess we would have to have a better understanding of how these things spread in the first place. I'm just
Yeah.
assuming it's super dry, everything is super close together. The way that these houses were built at some point in time make it easy, additionally, make it easy for them, for the whole city to be taken. But it's the same thing with New York. People don't realize this. New York is a tiny island. New York is not a
Yeah.
big island, right? So
Right.
when New York floods, and all of this stuff, no one says I'm moving out of New York because I never want to deal with this ever again, right? Um, but New York is, in my opinion, is one of the places where these natural disaster movies, they've kind of been telling us for a long time that crap is going to go down in New York, right? Crap is going to go down in LA. I just don't think that the government can do anything about it, Are we now going to say, hey, look, these houses should not be built so close together?
Well,
Who
I
has
don't
to
know.
know?
I think with LA, I think so. With LA, I think the issue is, in my opinion, again, I don't, and again, we'll find out more as far as investigation. I'm not an LA expert. I think the issue in LA is that, from what I understand, they have a lot of brush that's not cleaned up a lot of
Hmm.
times. Two, I think they have a huge homeless population. If I had to guess,
Hmm.
I think somebody with a gripe started the fire. That's two.
I know they caught a
Three.
woman. They caught a woman that started one
Oh,
of the
they did.
fires.
That's what I heard. I
That
heard they
one of
had
the fires,
arrested
yeah.
somebody. And then three, I think the other thing is because they have those Santa Ana winds. So, a fire, we have the natural elements, but you have a certain combination of things that have to happen to create devastation. So fire in and of itself is bad, but if you have the winds to make it what it is, so I don't have the answers, but I think that it's not so much the houses being close, but you do have the issue of what the fires are started on and then the potential for these winds. Because what they
I think it
have
won't
right now
amount
is
to
they have these
the houses
hurricane
being
winds.
close, right? If my house
What?
burns to the ground by itself because the houses are too far away, right? I think that that's one of those types of easements. Well, I'll tell you this: when it comes to city planning, there's so much that 50 years ago, 100 years ago, city planners could not predict. They could not
Right,
predict how many cars would be on the road, right? Which is why we have so many crazy traffic issues. They could not predict these fires being as insane as they are,
right.
because, once you need to produce and provide housing and you need to make it dense and people need to live on top of each other, there's risks associated with that. So there's a lot of things that you cannot predict. So now that it's set in stone, what do you do?
I mean, I don't know. I think that maybe I'm just throwing stuff out there. Maybe they have to build with more fire resistant materials because
But
they.
but that would only work for new properties. You can't if they're not going to insist that Dawn, who owns a super old house that will catch on fire like that, right? And also, if it's windy enough, my neighbor's house will, unless you are ready to. And again, California is heavily regulated, and a lot of Californians hate the regulation for so many reasons. So there's things
Mhm.
that you can do to predict new builds. There's things that you can do to predict when someone is buying and selling, right? To prevent certain things, like having certain requirements. But if I'm sitting there in my house for 50 years and I'm not selling or buying or doing anything, you're going to have to come to me and say, hey, we're going to have to redo the sides of your house. Like,
Well, that's not going to happen. But
right?
as far as these neighborhoods, they're gone. So I think
Yeah.
going.
Oh, yeah.
You know
Moving
what I'm saying?
forward.
They'll
Yeah.
they'll have to further rebuild. And again, I don't know. I'm not a environmental engineer in any form of the fashion. But for the new builds, I don't know if it'll be fire resistant stuff. I don't know if there's more water infrastructure to battle stuff because from what I understand, even with they said in the Palisades, which is where a lot of this happened, they said the water tanks were empty or they weren't as full as they should have been, and then a lot of the fire hydrants, a lot of the hydrants didn't have the water; they were running out of water. But
Hmm.
from what I understand, even if the
I was gonna
tanks,
say,
even if the
if the
tanks
water
were
was there,
full,
could they have prevented
and the
this?
water was there. Even firefighters were like, even if we had, because they got on Karen Bass, the mayor,
Yeah.
because she cut funding to the fire department last year and put more into the police. But from what
I
I
heard she
read,
added $50 million in funding. Actually, I heard it was the opposite.
I heard that she took some, it was like 20% cut and they added more to police.
Hmm.
But from what I read, even if you had two
Yeah.
times the firefighters, it wasn't going to stop this natural disaster. So to your point, there are certain things that happen, like you said, with Hurricane Sandy.
Yeah.
It's about where you're building, and you're absolutely right. I think that's something that they'll have to consider too, because as men, sometimes as mankind, we can be arrogant and say, we're going to do it anyway,
We're
or we,
forgetful and we're arrogant.
yeah,
You see LBI now, these people are acting like this never happened and it could never happen again.
crazy,
And I'm like, and you could see when you're in LBI, you can see the bay and you can see that's how thin LBI is. But
yeah,
people are still investing millions of dollars because that's how much those houses cost on LBI.
right, right,
Millions and millions of dollars, right?
yeah.
On this tiny little island. If you're telling me, the water levels are rising, if you're telling me not to build here, that's major. The US government is never going to say don't move to LA. The government
Well,
is never going to say
no,
don't live here, right?
you're absolutely right. They're not going to do that. And the other thing too is that insurance costs. So what's
Oh,
happened with insurance in northern LA? Now this is before these fires happened in northern LA. Companies like State Farm have totally stopped insuring.
as
They
they
just
should,
stopped insuring
as they
huge
should.
parts. Same thing in Florida. So because of the hurricanes and wildfires, certain insurance companies at first they were jacking the prices up, and at a certain point they're like, "No, we're not gonna cover
As they
certain
should,
things."
but we don't listen because we like to blame insurance companies, big businesses for everything. And listen, there's plenty of blame for that they should, have. But on something
Yeah,
like this, if I'm an insurance company and I know that
yeah,
you want to build a house in a volcano, I'm not
right,
insuring you.
right,
You know what I
exactly.
mean? Like it doesn't
Yeah,
make sense. So insurance is not meant to, is not, insurance is not FEMA, it's not a government agent. They're there to make money. Now, a case
right.
can be made that they make way too much freaking money, but I would rather have insurance than not have insurance. And if an
Yeah,
insurance company is telling me that I will not insure you a property in this town, I'm going to listen because they're the ones evaluating the list better than anybody else could. So,
yeah,
I know we like to beat up on insurance companies, and I've seen a lot of that on social media. I think that they do a lot of shady things. But listen, like people have to take some responsibility for what is happening out there.
yeah,
The federal government and insurance company are not your mom and dad, right? They're not. We have to have some kind of responsibility in saying, "Oh yeah, we knew." There's certain things that we just know. The people in LBI, if God forbid something was to happen where another natural disaster were to take place in LBI and all the homes will be, no one can say, oh, we didn't know that could possibly happen. But we
yeah,
love to blame the government. We love to blame insurance companies. We love to blame big business. And my whole thing is, yes, they do a lot of stuff that's blameworthy. But something like this, for you to say, hey, I'm not going to insure, a house on top of a freaking, in a cave
right,
somewhere.
right, right,
Okay, that tells me
right,
something, right?
right,
That tells me maybe
right.
that's not the investment that I need to
Maybe
be
that's not where
making.
I need to be.
Right. So I think that we all have to
Yeah.
kind of put our big boy pants on. It's just, this is certainly not the time, right? For blame, because there's a lot of devastation and a lot of pain out there. And these insurance company do not have the capacity to make everybody whole. This is what
No, you
people
know
also
what?
don't
I'm
understand.
so glad you said that, because that in and of itself is so. It's the point. There's this idea that insurance companies just have this endless. They have a lot of money, but like you said, the insurance model. And again,
Yes.
there's plenty of blame to go around, but insurance model is to collect and pay out as little as possible.
Yes.
Now, in certain cases they do have to pay out, but they insurance companies manage risk, like you said, better than anybody else, because
Hmm.
their whole thing is about how much am I collecting versus how much I'm gonna have to pay out. And they have to understand that risk, because if they get that risk wrong, it
Yeah.
only takes one disaster and they're out of business
Yep.
because they can't cover it. They absolutely
They
can't.
just can't do
And
it.
and like you said, to the point, if an insurance company says I'm not insuring a certain region anymore, they've already, then you should, to me, you
Let's
should
think
be
about this
shook.
a little bit. And again, it would be one thing if one insurance company says, you know what, this area is too rich for my blood. But
Yeah.
if the place is completely uninsurable at all, maybe you listen to that. And maybe there's just one insurance company that'll cover you. Maybe just the one insurance company. Worry about that a little bit, right? And I get it.
Yeah.
Like if you're already in your home and these things are happening, there's not a lot you can do about that.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think that insurance companies, should at the very least, before they tell you no, say, look, these are the things that you can retrofit in your house right now that will lower the risk and yes, will insure you.
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot of Old Testament stuff that's going to continue to happen as a lot of our towns just become bigger and bigger. If we think about
I
New
mean,
York
these things
City,
are evolving. Natural disasters are just a forever evolving thing, and that's why I thought it was ridiculous, especially right for the Palisades or L.A. fires. I'll just say L.A. fires in general to try to, they're trying to blame. And I'm not a huge fan of anybody in per se, but Gavin Newsom, Karen Bass, these human beings. I mean, there was one woman that rode up
well,
on
that's
Gavin Newsom.
political and it's not something we should take seriously, right? We
Well,
know
there's
that if
people.
something,
These are everyday people who really believe. To your point, they really believe. Like, there's a woman who wrote up on Gavin Newsom, like,
I saw
"Yo,
that.
he's supposed to be calling Trump." I'm like, what is Donald Trump? What is anybody gonna physically do in a disaster like this? So I think that going forward, as far as real estate, I totally agree. People are going to have to, one, prior to buying, understand where you're buying,
Hmm.
understand what as far as natural disasters, because these things don't happen every day. They happen once in a lifetime,
Right.
twice in a lifetime. So you don't always get the
But not necessarily. I mean, Joe Rogan just told you that he got evacuated 3 times. Now, that doesn't mean
no,
his
that's
house
true.
burned
In
down,
that
but
scenario,
something,
yeah.
someone is telling you that, yo, this could happen to you.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
could happen to you. So I
Very
agree
true.
with you. There's certain things that are only going to happen once in a lifetime, because the disaster is just so catastrophic and no one could have seen it happen, and there's no way to prevent it. But we got to stop talking about this like we didn't see it coming. That firefighter that Joe Rogan talked about is not the only firefighter that was thinking this. He
Yeah.
doesn't have some crystal ball. I think that it just
Mhm.
the fact that there have been wildfires that are uncontrollable, right? In the past, in fact, every year, they
Yeah.
have wildfires.
Usually
Um,
it's Northern California. It's usually not in Southern California. So
mhm,
I think that that's the thing is Northern California, they're kind of used to it to an extent, but this has never happened in LA,
right,
that
right.
I know of.
No,
You know what
not
I'm
me,
saying?
me as well. But I think that what's sad about this is an arson, someone that has a feeling to do that. They see this. Oh my God, they're salivating. They're salivating. I think it's going to be
Listen,
very, very scary, to say the least, with how things move forward. But California is in trouble LA is in trouble when it comes to something like this,
seriously.
and we're not sure
Did
what can be done about it. Unfortunately.
did you hear about someone told me that there was, I don't know if I where I was in October, November. It's always a busy month for me because we got 3 birthdays in our house in
Oh
October. But
boy.
I was told that there was a big fire in New Jersey around that time, some type of a forest fire that burned, obviously not as much as LA, but it went on pretty crazy in northern New Jersey. Someone was telling me about it. I'm like, I don't remember it, but they
I
were
might have
saying,
remembered it, but I think because it wasn't like a devastating level type thing, it was just one of those things. You're talking
yeah,
about this past October?
yeah, October 20. They said I think it was either in October or November 2024, and I'm like, I don't remember anything,
I don't
but
recall, but you see, we have the we're lucky enough for things like that to not, be to be the issue that it might be in
knock
other
on
places.
wood.
But no, I don't recall that.
Okay, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see, and again, like I said, I think whatever infrastructurally needs to be changed. We're gonna have to deal with it one way or another. I think in LA. and also Florida too, because they're having the same issue. So everybody ran to Florida a couple years ago too during the pandemic, and from what I understand now, there's certain markets where the prices are dipped because people now want to sell their house because their insurance has gone up so much.
Wow.
So it's now gotten to the point where, obviously some of them are stuck in their home because of low interest rates, but even they're not selling because they want to go somewhere else just to go somewhere else. And now it's becoming, oh, my insurances went up, I don't know, $500 or $1,000 a year or whatever it is.
Oh man, I can't
So,
even believe that I didn't even think to tell you this, but my property in Philadelphia, because it's a row house,
hmm
property two doors down caught on fire, right? They're all attached to these houses.
okay.
I had to switch insurance companies for this exact reason. My insurance went up times 10.
Wait, whoa, 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 whoa.
My insurance
say
went
that
up times
say that
10.
again for the people in the back. You say your insurance. So the property you own in Philadelphia is a row house, and a property two
Two
properties
doors
down caught
down.
on fire. How long
Insurance went up
before
times
the insurance
10.
company?
Say it
How
again.
long before they
It
implemented
actually
that?
took a year before they did it. A lot of people expect it to be immediate, but it took a year before they did it. I think part of the reason is because I'd already paid for the year, so that when it came to the next year, it was absolutely astronomical. I was fortunate enough to have been working with an insurance company. I think it was, no, I know it was Plymouth Rock. My insurance agent told me that, hey, listen, a lot of these guys are in financial trouble right now. So they were spending like fat pigs in 2020. Everybody was making crazy amounts of money in 2020. And then what then started to happen was things started to normalize. And then now construction material is more expensive. So if an insurance company has to pay for repairs, it's drastically even more expensive for them. So then when these things start to happen, they absolutely will increase your insurance in an abusive way. Luckily, I actually was not insured by the most popular insurance company in Philadelphia, right, at the time. And so I moved to them. And because they had a very broad base and because they had a huge market share, and they are used to row houses being close together, et cetera, et cetera, I was able to get reasonable insurance. But
Wait,
they,
now what did you think when you saw an increase of
I thought it
10
was a mistake. I actually ignored it
times?
initially. I was like, this is not, I'm not reading this properly, right?
Yeah.
I completely ignored it until I'm trying to think of what ended up happening. Until they started to send me what my new monthly payment was going to be. I'm like, are you out of your minds? And then I looked into it, and then I started looking for alternative insurance.
That's crazy.
Mhm.
That's 10 times, like
10
10
times.
times. They went from 0 to 100.
They went from 0 to 100. But again, my agent told me that, hey, listen, it was going to go up because of this particular company anyways. They're not doing particularly well at this time.
Yeah.
But obviously what happened with the fire two doors down. And you know what's so interesting about that? If someone has to rebuild a house, if a fire happens two doors down in this direction from me, and they immediately rebuilt, which is what ended up happening. Now the property is brand new. Everything is beautiful,
Sparkling.
brand new.
Sparkling.
So that should essentially lower the risk for everybody, you would think. But really what they're doing is they're just making their money back. They're making their money back from whatever it is that they lost. And that is not the function of insurance. The function of insurance should be when there is a disaster. I've been with this company for almost as long as I've had the property, right? So I've paid you guys premiums for over a decade now. It should not automatically trigger something in that way. So
Not to that
unfortunately,
extent.
that's how insurance works. And
Yeah.
that to me was just completely obnoxious. It just didn't make any sense. And I don't think that they were assessing the risk properly. But I think part of it is because they probably did not do as much business in Philadelphia as the other insurance company. Because I went to Allstate. So I think Allstate probably better understood the future risk than
Sure.
Plymouth Rock at the time. That's just my assumption. I don't know what was happening behind the scenes, but I think that that also has sometimes a lot to do with it. But no, these wildfires thing, if I was insurer, I would. And I heard that from a firefighter, and I knew now that there's a likelihood of more arsons happening in LA because an arson is salivating right now, literally thinking
Yeah.
about how to make a name for themselves or whatever it is that get them going. I think that it's going to be problematic. I don't know that I would insure it in LA anymore, unless
Yeah.
the city was proposing some safeguards that made sense.
Yeah, it'd have to be something because you know, I'm just assuming. I don't know who started it, but LA has huge. I mean, a lot of places in the country have huge wealth disparities. So, but
Yeah.
LA is always a great example because you have Hollywood, you have what people perceive as all these rich people, and then you have a lot of Skid Row,
Yeah.
all these poor people.
Yeah.
But a lot of people who lost their home were not rich. I know a few
No.
people out there. I know personally, I know a few people out there, and I know
Oh.
of a few other people that are out there, and yeah, there's a lot of regular people. They're not gajillionaires. You know what I'm saying? And they lost everything. But
But I think
it
because
it
we heard
is
from Paris Hilton and we heard from all of these people losing their homes, we're assuming that it was just in, Beverly Hills. And it's not.
yeah,
That's not what happened. Majority of the
exactly.
people that are devastated are not millionaires with second and third homes.
Yeah, and ultimately it doesn't help. I mean, I guess if you're homeless and you're angry or whatever the case is, I mean, you don't really care about the larger ramifications of any of this stuff. But it is a situation for insurance that is going to be interesting going forward,
Hmm.
particularly in those areas. Now, just swinging back to your situation in Philly, so we will assume that your neighbors who had a fire were not insured by Plymouth. So
Right, right. Oh, you
so
know what?
my
That's one thing I failed to mention. So I
yes,
did put in a smoke because I have tenants in there. I did put in a smoke claim. That's part of it that I need to mention. So they
okay,
had to pay out a smoke claim. But no
okay.
matter what, that should not have triggered a your insurance is going up times 10.
So
That.
my
Mhm.
assumption in that, and you tell me if I'm wrong, my assumption is that because I always, with insurance companies, I assume this. Let's say your neighbor who had the fire was insured by Allstate, State Farm,
Right,
whoever. You're insured by Plymouth.
right,
Something happens over there, and they say, "Good, now we have a reason to raise these rates."
right.
So I'm assuming that that was an opportunity to raise the rate because of their financial situation.
Raise the rate, but times 10 also is criminal.
It's crazy. Yeah,
Should be
that's
criminal, right?
yeah,
That is not a proper assessment of the risk. These
not at all.
houses have been standing for 100 years, right? Yes, there is fire damage, but these row houses have firewalls. Philadelphia is a robust town. The
Yeah,
fire department can get to you. We are not LA. That is a criminal, increasing your rate. It's too much.
yeah,
I understand that things are going to go up. I understand that taxes are going to go up. I understand that insurance is going to go up. These are not
right.
things that I love to know. But as a realtor, I know these things, right?
Yeah,
And yeah, I don't like it when it happens, but it's going to happen. But it should not happen to the point where it's just, exorbitant. Like that's too, I've never seen, that's just too much. Even my
I've
insurance
never
agent
heard
was
of
just like,
anything like
what the
that.
heck? He was like, he said, I've never seen this. I've never seen this. And he did go on to say that there are certain insurance companies that are basically saying they just don't want to insure certain properties, right? But I think they're just not properly managing the risk. So anyway, I'm with Allstate now, and I like them a lot. I love my policy very much, as you can imagine. It's not times 10, but I think it's also
Yeah,
because they just have a huge market base there, and they understand they understand the risk maybe better
yeah.
than Plymouth did at the time.
They want to do business.
Yeah.
Well, I want to pivot a little bit to single family homes, right?
Hmm.
So there's still I'm reading the temperature of the conversation. There's still a lot of people who are putting out information as far as saying, you know what, don't buy a home because of all these issues. Don't
Bullshit.
buy.
Ooh, can I say that?
No, no, it's all good. You can say
No,
it. Listen,
such bullshit.
and there's a lot of that going on because of what, don't buy a single family home, or don't buy a home because of the maintenance costs, don't buy a home because of the taxes. You don't really own the home, you'll never own the home. Even when you own the home, you'll still be paying taxes. And again, people could say, okay, you're biased, right? But I think that the reason why
I'm
I
not.
don't like the reason
I'm
why I don't
sorry.
like, I'm gonna let you rock. The reason why I don't like the messaging, though, I don't like the messaging because a lot of times what happens is that there's like an agenda, right? So there's a two part question that I want to pose to you, right, in this conversation. So there's the whole thing. These are regular everyday people too saying, you know what, I regret buying a home. Don't buy a home. It's better just to rent, because of all the things that come along, the responsibilities of owning a home. It costs too much, yada yada. And then in addition to that, you have, as of last year, and my figures might be slightly off, but single family homes, there's about I think it's a little over 600,000 single family homes that are owned by institutional investors,
Hmm.
or layman terms, corporations, right?
Hmm.
Corporations, not families who own the homes. And
Hmm.
these single family homes, whether they be row houses, townhouses, attached, non-attached single family homes, are owned by institutions. What is their purpose? To rent them, right? So it's not evil, but let me say this. My question to you is that, one, do you think that that agenda is being continually pushed, by disgruntled homeowners? And also, do you think that the government at some point should come into play and say, you know what, corporations should no longer be able to own single family homes?
No.
Should there be something regulatory put in for that? What do you think?
No. A corporation should always be able to do whatever it is that the market allows.
Gotcha.
I think that this is an information issue. I
Mhm.
think that this is a cultural issue. It is a lot easier to convince someone that they don't need to own a home, by way of, hey, it's going to be a lot of work, if they have never, if they don't come from a family that owns homes and understands the drastic and dramatic way in which home ownership changes not just your current economic circumstance and quality of life, but your future one as well, right? So I think that it's BS in so many ways. We know historically that the reason why Black and brown people, for example, were left out of home ownership is because that is how we create wealth in this country for individuals, right? This
Yeah.
whole idea of that all of a sudden not being the case because things are expensive. Do you really want to be paying $3,000 for a 2 bedroom somewhere, and that price just potentially keeps going up and up and up? That's really where you want to spend your money. You want to spend 40 grand a year, 40 grand a year paying a landlord's mortgage and taxes. I mean, the math just never jives for me. It's like there's nowhere in the country where I would say renting. Oh, well, New York City renting makes sense because you just can't afford, the
New York
properties,
City,
right?
New York City
So
is the anomaly
that
always.
might be
So
it, right?
yeah,
Maybe parts of LA, maybe parts of San Francisco, but to
San
say
Fran too.
don't own a home on so many levels is diabolically either stupid or evil. And I hate to use terms that are that drastic, but this really is. Anyone that's pushing the idea that you should not own a home, and there's no value in that long term, and all of these, all because you're blah, 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 it is complete and utter garbage. When you own a home, right, your mortgage is a lien, right? It's still your house. It is a lien. If you buy a house today and it's worth $100,000 and next year it's worth $150,000, that equity is your equity, not the bank's equity. Like
Thank
that
you.
it doesn't, the cheapest debt that you're ever going to get is a mortgage. There is no cheaper debt out there in the world.
Thank
It
you.
it just doesn't exist. So this idea that somehow, oh, it is baffling. It is frustrating. I hate when people go online and say these things to people. Oh, you need to invest in bonds and you need to get a trust. All these other complicated things that most individuals cannot do, cannot figure out, will not be able to figure out. And the funny thing is, once you're in a home that you own, it's actually much easier to start thinking about some of these other investment strategies, right? Okay, now maybe I can now start pivoting towards um uh what do you call it, stocks and things of that nature. But I'm sorry, when it comes to being able to pay your kids, let's say you buy a house now today, maybe you have a 5-year old. In 10 years, some of the money for your kids' college could come from your home. Some of your money for
Yep.
buying that
Yeah.
second home are coming from your existing home. When I bought my house in Philadelphia, I was 23 years old. It was one of the hardest things that I've ever had to do. This is prior to 2008. And the reason why it was so difficult is because my interest rates was completely insane and I wasn't qualified, right? Because before 2008, they were giving loans to everybody. Now, fast forward to now, a gazillion years later, I took money out of that property to buy my single family home now. I wish I had the capacity to have done that move earlier. Now I have two assets that I don't have to really do anything but maintain them. I can pull cash out of either one of them depending on my credit situation to make other investments, right? So there's just so many reasons why it's such a nonsense argument to tell people not to buy homes. And I think relying on people's who maybe don't want to cut the grass, who maybe don't want to deal with, these expenses associated with living in a home. My mortgage is less than most people's rent right now in the Northeast. You cannot make that argument to me. You just can't. If you're telling me every 10 years, rents are going to be astronomically higher, but my mortgage is going to stay relatively the same as far as the proportion, or even a little bit more because of taxes, insurance, and some of the things you're talking about, it still doesn't touch what someone is paying in rent. You couldn't rent my house for the mortgage that I'm
Oh
paying.
no,
You couldn't.
no, mine neither. Well,
You can't.
you know what it is. You know what it is, Dawn. I think that these arguments are being made now in a post 2022-23
They were
world.
making them before, though,
So
Osu.
they were making them. No, no, of course they were making them before. It's not new, but I think the reason why I wanted to bring this up is because I think it's catching steam with people in a time where housing is not affordable and there's, inflation and all the costs. Let's be honest, housing right now is not affordable for most people, but it is important to keep in context everything you just said. And I think that that's why I wanted to bring that up because I think that in my opinion, I think there's an agenda to make everybody renters. And I think
Oh,
that
yeah. But they're absolutely.
people who want to rent, there's nothing wrong. There's always going to be renters. There's always a space to rent. But the agenda of and I'm seeing this from people who say they've owned homes, older people, depending on where you're at. Like if I was going to play, I won't even play it, but I was going to play a clip from this couple. They're not older, but they're, probably in their 50s maybe. And they've now moved out of the US, moved to Thailand, and they're like, you know what, the dream of owning a home or that whole thing about owning a home, we're not doing that anymore. We sold our house. This is why. And I think that it's important to put those things in context.
But what did you
So
say? They sold their home.
I think they sold their home or whatever. But the point is what I'm saying is you're seeing this from people who owned homes and people who never owned homes. So you're seeing this messaging. And I think that,
But that's two different, completely different messaging.
no, I agree with you. I agree with you. But what I'm saying is they're saying the same things, but they're all coming with their own different contexts of where they're coming
So
from.
where I do think it's the message makes sense. For example, across the street from me where I live, I was listing agent, and I also was, grateful, thankful enough to also bring the buyers to that transaction. Is you had a couple that had been sitting in this house for 30 years, right? The house is too much house for them. But guess what they did? They bought early on as a couple. Early on as a couple. Now 30 years
Right.
later, they have $500,000 in the bank, right?
Well, I don't want to conflate two things. I
Well,
agree
but
with you.
that's what I'm trying
I
to
don't want
clear
to
up.
conflate downsizing because downsizing is different.
But
So
whatever it is that you do, if you sell and go live on a cruise ship, or you sell and you go live in Thailand, you have something to sell. And it's okay for someone in that circumstance to say, I don't want to deal with the maintenance. Yeah, I get it. If
no,
I'm 85 years
that's
old, I get that.
absolutely, absolutely. They're downsizing. Same thing with
Right.
my father and mother-in-law. They just downsized,
But
right?
they have
So
something to downsize
yes,
from.
yes. So the thing is, my point is that you don't older people or anybody who has owned a home, putting out that information is wrong because
No, but we
they,
have to be smart about it's not wrong. Like if you're 85 years old and you're selling your house, I know why. I get it.
no, what I'm saying is that it's wrong in the sense where I wouldn't tell someone younger don't buy a home is what
No,
I'm saying. You
absolutely.
feel
But I
me?
don't think that's
That's
what
what
they're
I'm
saying
saying.
either. I don't think that
Huh?
older people are saying young people shouldn't buy houses.
No, not older people. I'm talking about these particular people I was saying. You have some people who are putting out that information who know better is my point. They're literally saying things like that,
Right.
And then you have the people who secretly own single family homes or secretly invested in institutional properties and it's all good. I do agree. I don't know if telling corporations they can't own single family homes is the answer per se, but at the same time, I think people, and that's why I said, I'm glad you said all that because that's the whole point. I want people have to put it in context about what owning a home means. And people are very susceptible to information online, especially if you're getting your ass kicked trying to get approved or
Yeah.
you're getting your ass kicked trying to find a home and people are like, no, it's just a better option not to do it. just go ahead and do X, Y, Z. And for you to, I'm glad you reiterated the fact that, a home can be an instrument for wealth later.
Yes.
It can be
Yes.
an instrument for wealth in the interim
Yes.
prior to selling. And people often don't understand that, and they're not tapped into that because a lot of times we're focused on right now. And for you to describe what you did in early 20s and what you're able to do later, you know what I'm saying? If you were in your early 20s and someone gave you some stupid advice, you might not have been able to do that. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the first thing that I'm going to try and get my kids to do as soon as she can is to buy something. If she's going to go away for college, I've had some clients buy like condos in New Jersey from Texas or wherever it is that they're coming from because their kids are going to school at Rutgers. And guess who's paying the mortgage? The roommates.
Yeah.
And so he gets to still, so he may be able to buy that. So what they do is, you send your kid away for a year prior to the town that you're living in. They're going to be taking advantage of a couple different things: in-state tuition, right? To meet that residency requirement.
Hmm.
And if you're living there and you buy something with an FHA, right? And you're there for 4 years or you're there for 8 years, depending on how long you're in college, guess what you get to do with your FHA again when you move back to Texas? Buy something again with your FHA in Texas. Because the underwriter is going to know that, oh, okay, you were there for school. Okay, fine. That's done. So you now have two FHAs, first time home buyer, incentivize either programming or just 3.5% down. Genius. There's so
And
many
you're
ways.
24, you're 23, 24 years old potentially when this could be happening, right?
I have multiple clients in by Rutgers University in Society Hill, not one or two, multiple clients that purchase because their kids are going to be in medical school for forever and a year. And
Hmm.
instead of them paying out of state tuition, and instead of them paying for board, for housing for the full 8 years out of pocket, they're investing in something for 8 years. You mean to tell me and listen, these are not people that are wealthy. These are people that have what? They have their own homes wherever it is that they live because they bought early as a couple. They bought in their late 20s, late 30s. Their kid is now college age. They have all that equity in their existing homes. They can now make this investment. So
Hmm.
no, I'm sorry. Anyone who's telling you don't buy a home because listen, if you don't want to buy a house because you just don't like maintenance and you're just never going to do it and the house is going to fall apart, stay in your apartment. But that's the only argument you can make for me. If it's that important to you to live in a house where you have to do nothing, if that's that important to you, that's the only argument you could make. But
Hmm.
financially, economic, there's no other argument you could make to me other than I just don't want to cut the grass. I never want to cut the grass.
No, I totally agree. I think that, and that's the thing. The idea of maintenance, that's just responsibility. It's gonna come up. You're gonna get your ass kicked in life at times. There's never gonna be a time in life if you're gonna get anything of any value or any substance where you're
Then you
not
don't have
gonna
to
get
take
your
care
ass
of
kicked.
it. Take care of it like you take
You
care of your
have to.
sneakers. Take care,
Yeah.
come on. Your
People make you gotta
car.
make you got your car. You gotta maintain anything you own. But the benefit of a house is that a house is gonna most of the time going to appreciate long term one way or another. And I
Not
think
most of the
that
time. Not most of the time. 100% of the time.
well, I'm saying most of the time in context of it's not maybe it doesn't appreciate in 3 years, but
Sure.
over the long term, it's gonna depreciate a little bit at times, but over the long term, you're gonna win. So, and at the end of the day, I think that the messaging is just the messaging that's going out there, especially in these times, I think is detrimental. Because at the end of the day, people are not able to take advantage of things like you just said. I mean, at the end of, if you have a child going to school and you know, everything you just said as far as buying a home where they're going to college and putting them in a position to buy a second home. Maybe it's their first home, maybe they're getting married, whatever it is, second home. But also the debt that people incur going to school. This can offset some of that debt because it can pay it back. So that you know what I'm saying? So that's a big thing when you said that. That's the first thing I'm thinking. You go to medical school, my older sister's a doctor. It wasn't cheap, to
Listen.
go to medical school.
So you
So
still paying for that.
you feel yeah, exactly. So
Mhm.
if you're set up at a certain time while you're going to med school, by the time you start practicing and you're into your practice, okay, maybe you have some debt, but it can be offset and be paid by these assets. So I think that's a great. I'm so glad you said that because I never thought about that. You know what I'm saying? And
Real
a
estate,
lot of us
to the point,
are
is
not doing that.
such a great tool. It's such a great instrument to, to elevate your family financially. I know we talk about what was the tagline that we were all talking about, generational wealth. You real
Right,
estate is where you start. That's the baseline of where you start. Not all these other weird, fancy, risky things that you can do in stocks and all of this stuff. I'm not saying that stocks are not a great, place to start, but you can't be linear in your approach, especially when you're trying to
right,
give direction to the market as a whole. The one
right.
place where you have more support financially from both the federal government, whether people like that or not, I don't think people realize that in FHA, the reason you can put down 3.5% is because the federal government is backing that loan up. The
Right.
reason why back in the day you had to put down a lot more, but once the federal government told banks, "Hey, we will insure this. Go ahead and lend it
Sure.
to them at 3.5%," even though 3.5%, someone putting down 3.5% may produce more risk for us. It's insured by the federal government, so they do it.
Right.
So there's so many things that are available to you as far as a homeowner is concerned. The longer you wait, the longer you hem and haw and listen to all of these other things, the more you price yourself out. You wait 3 years, you're pricing yourself out. Your salary is not going to increase as fast as the market is going to increase. You're not
Yeah.
going to get that new promotion as quickly as how these home values are going up. It just doesn't work
Yeah.
that way. So I think it's very
Yeah.
bad messages. I think it's very, very, very dangerous. And it makes sense. If you're an institution, you want that floating around. I don't want to compete with a home buyer.
Of
I
course.
don't. If I'm an
Of course.
investor at this point, I want fewer home buyers out there on the market. They pay more for stuff. I want to
Of
pay
course.
less. So I want you to stay in your apartment so that I can
Yeah.
acquire that asset and I can make good use of that asset while you're staying in that apartment. And oh, by the way, you don't like that they hiked your rentals in that apartment? Okay, come stay in my house that I bought
Right.
that you didn't buy. So
Right.
it's just
Right.
it's a very frustrating
You're absolutely
conversation
right.
when people misinform people in that way.
Yeah. Well, the trend is going in that direction because of the times we're in, and I think that it is important um, to lay out those scenarios of home ownership. I think the full story of what home ownership could be is not told, and I think that's the real issue. I think people on the pessimistic side, people focus on the insurance, the taxes, and things like that. That can be challenging at times. And then also people are like, "Oh, you have the home for 30 years. You buy it for 300,000. You're going to pay 1.1 by the time 30 years is over." But again, people don't realize one thing you said as far as the cost to borrow is the cheapest you're ever going to borrow. In addition, you have options to do things with the property. You do own it. The bank just has a lien. I hate when people say the bank, you don't own the house. The bank owns the house. It's like the stupidest.
It's the
That's
stupidest
one of the
thing.
stupidest things. But you know what? People who are not tapped in and don't understand that, there's a lot of people who believe that. They believe it. Well, I don't own the house anyway. I might as well rent. I'm renting from the bank. You're not renting from the bank. The bank just loaned you the money. They have a lien on the property. You can sell the house anytime you want to. You can take advantage of the property being worth more than what it was when you bought it.
Mhm.
Equity. You can take advantage of that equity. You know, you can do a HELOC. You can borrow against the equity and have an open line of credit. You have options to do things that you don't have to do, that you
A
don't have
hundred
when you're renting.
percent. A hundred
And
percent.
I think that people need to look at that and understand that, because it's not just about realtors or just trying to get a commission and
Oh
all
my
that stuff.
God.
It's really home ownership, the benefits of it. People who really care about that messaging, are trying to get people to understand that a little
The
more.
real message is get into a piece of real estate as soon as you possibly can. Get your children into real estate as soon as you possibly can do that. If you want to spend any kind of money, to help your kid get into a house. Make that something in their minds that they know, okay, I gotta do that. I gotta
Yeah,
do that ASAP. It
yeah,
is overwhelming. It does seem like, oh my gosh, I have to come to the table with all of this money. Everyone doesn't have all of this money, but the conversation should never be, don't buy a house. It should never be that. I think that there's only a small sliver of people that benefit from renting. I think they tend to be older or in markets that it's just impossible to buy anyways.
I totally agree. I think that is, in a nutshell, the perfect way to put that, because those are the two groups of people who do benefit from it.
Right.
Everybody else, I totally agree. You're not going to benefit from it by waiting. If you can't do it, it's fine. A lot of people can't do it right now, but
Right.
I agree. As soon as you can do it, and also too, to your point, you have to put a will out there to make it happen, to make it a priority,
Oh
you
yeah.
know?
Oh yeah.
So, mm, that's awesome. Well, D, I appreciate you as always. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for
Um,
having me. It's always fun to chat
yes,
real estate.
yes. It's always a pleasure. You'll be back as always. You my regular, so we'll be back talking about this soon. And I'll put your link in the chat. Any last words for the people in the world of real estate in general? Any last words of advice for people who feel discouraged or worried or concerned?
Yeah, I think people should broaden their understanding of what it means to invest in real estate. Does it mean, okay, fine, maybe the market is just too hot for multifamilies. Maybe it's a single family. Maybe I purchase something with my siblings. Maybe I be creative with what you do, but don't wait, another 5, 10 years to buy something. So that would really be it. When it comes to real estate, the sooner you get into it, the sooner you can reap the rewards because it's a slow process. But I'm telling you that the 20 years, it goes by so fast. I think a lot of people our age can say that it goes by really fast.
Oh
And
yeah.
if you ask anyone our age who is in a home now, let's say that, the average age, I think, for buying a house is 40 something, I think, or maybe late 30s. If you can do it sooner, do it sooner. And it doesn't have to be astronomical. It could be something small. It could be a little condo. It doesn't have to be your final destination as far as the home that your dream house. It doesn't have to be that, but just buy something that you can make good use of in the future. So those are my last words.
That is that's golden. So
I would say so.
all right. I appreciate you as always, Don Masenya, the super, super duper realtor and much more.
That's
So I
word on the
appreciate you.
street. Super duper.
I appreciate your time. I'll talk to you again soon, my friend.
Thanks, Osu. Thanks for having
All right.
me.
No, thanks for coming on. Thanks.